Kirby Smart within the span of 15 minutes gets the top two players, the best on offense and the best on defense. Like that to me was a kind of probably the biggest story we've seen in the last week. Now, what does it mean? Because I don't know if one of them will be eligible. Is a whole nother question. But that to me was the story of the past week with the recruiting period opening up.
Is the eligibility question for Kendrick? Because is it for Gilbert? Okay.
Yeah. Both, isn't it?
Arik Gilbert announced his intention to transfer to Georgia. He was at LSU. He was the team's second leading receiver. Initially said he was going to go to Florida. Now he's back open. He's a Georgia native. And so the idea that he would get pulled back into Georgia is not all that surprising. Derion Kendrick, we'd been talking about that here on the podcast. Rusty Mansell had sort of singled out that as a possibility. Derion Kendrick had some legal issues that led to his release from Clemson. Of course, Arik Gilbert, with the SEC, another news item was that the SEC is going to allow intra-conference transfers. So what is the eligibility questions for both of these?
I think with Kendrick, wasn't it the legal thing?
The legal side?
I don't think that's an issue anymore. From everything I've seen, the case was dropped now.
Are we assuming that he kept going to classes after the arrest? That's kind of my question. Like I'm interested in following this, guys. That's what I'm gonna say about this. I want to see academically for both.
For Gilbert, I think it's more of the behind the scenes rumblings that you hear. It's a massive question mark. Like, I don't know. I'll be more surprised if he is out there week 1 against Clemson. With Kendrick, I'm not as quite as sure, but from people kind of in the know, how many times have we seen this before where they figure it out? Like they figure out a way to get them in a boatload of classes in the summer and get you back up to speed where you're eligible, and you figure out a way to make it happen. So that's like, nothing would shock me, but I do think Gilbert has more significant challenges to get eligible. I took a ton of heat on this because I was, when this news came down, it's like, man, this is huge for Kirby, who has already amassed one of the most talented rosters in the country. But I said, be careful, because these are two what I would describe as high risk, high reward individuals who are coming into your program. They're incredibly talented, right? That's documented for both of them. But I do think they come with a risk. One, the eligibility risk, but two, the risk of the type of player who, one, wasn't showing up to a lot of practices at Clemson, was, enough of a knucklehead to get into some trouble, enough to where Dabo had to dismiss him from Clemson. And then another one in Arik Gilbert, who, remember, was going to transfer to Florida, has kind of had some inconsistencies off the field with where he stood. So you're bringing in some guys who, and then, immediately a bunch of Georgia fans were ticked off saying, well, what about Florida State guys, bunch of, criminals out there, and bringing up a lot of stuff and players who had off the field issues. And that is 100% true. Players don't care about those types of issues. Like, right. I mean, let's just be honest. Like if I'm throwing to a receiver, I don't care what his illegal issues are off the field. You know what I wanted to be able to count on? That he was going to be at practice, that he was going to run the route he was supposed to, that he was going to deliver when he was called upon. And probably one of those things that I would look for is somebody who's going to be my teammate and going to produce through thick and thin. No matter if we're playing for a national championship or we lost the first or second game of the season, like, I want somebody I can count on. And when this is kind of that new era where this is going to be a risk, I think, with everybody, where different players, different mindsets, a lot of guys have NFL goals, and that's all they want to do. And yeah, the national championship goals are kind of ancillary. Like, if that happens on the way, great. If not, it's not going to kill me. So I think there's a risk that runs with the type of character of a player you're bringing in. And that's where I was getting at with the explanation of, these are some character risks that you're taking. In one of those may be legal issues, but the more significant one is both these guys have, moved on from programs that they had a pretty good chance of winning at, and they couldn't fall in line there. And maybe it works out great. I really hope it does. But I think there's some significant risk there, and Kirby's willing to take on that risk. And almost every coach in the country would be willing to take the same risk. Okay, so do you think that changes? Like, Georgia has a very high floor. If Gilbert and Kendrick are not cleared to play in 2021, Georgia can still win the SEC championship. They still have the pieces on that roster that they can win the SEC championship.
do you think that the addition of either one of these players changes that floor? Like, could it impact the program and the team negatively to where it causes that kind of issue?
See, I think that's the great unknown risk. And that's where I think the risk is. Like the risk or the reward to the upside, the line versus Georgia didn't move, and their line to win the SEC didn't move. Like they're the same. Like, and normally in the NFL with a big time, like I haven't checked yet, but I guarantee the Titans win total and their chances to win the AFC have probably changed pretty dramatically. And so there's an aspect there where I do think there's a risk where your locker room could, like, and college players are more, they're more immature. They're more impacted by distractions. And if a player is having issues. So like, I don't know. That's where I think this is intriguing, because I do think there could be a downside risk if you've got somebody, let's just say, let's say they lose to Clemson and Kendrick gets showed up by his old team. Like, how is he going to handle that? Let's say they pick on him. I'm just throwing out scenarios where, and he's like, man, I mean, what if you start off with a couple rough losses? Is he going to opt out and say, I'm going to start preparing for the NFL? Or if Gilbert's not getting enough balls thrown his way and JT Daniels is struggling, is he going to call him out? This could happen with anybody, but with players who have had a history of not making the most mature decisions, I think there's a risk in that. And that could divide a locker room and could impact the actual product on the field and your ability to win games.
So we talked about this before on the show. I know Barton brought it up before. Certain programs are more focused on fit, and certain programs are more focused on just accumulating as much talent as possible. And among the really big boys, I don't think you can find a bigger split in this than Clemson and Georgia. Like we talked about how, Dabo tells his guys, hey, you get X number of knuckleheads, and the rest of these dudes better be really damn good kids so that the knuckleheads fall in line. I think they knew Kendrick was a risk when they signed him. I think he was one of those allotted ones, and he didn't end up working out there. Too many strikes. Georgia says, "Come on, we'll make it fit. Best players will play, and we're just you got to compete for your job." Look, Georgia's booted guys too. That's not to say like they're not running the prison football team. Like I don't think they've got a bunch of hardcore criminals on their team or anything like that, but. Like they care a little more, I think, about talent than they do fit, and Clemson cares a little more about fit. And I've said before, I think Clemson actually could be better in our recruiting rankings if they went after more talent, but they purposely choose to really focus on fit, which among the teams that recruit at that crazy high level is a bit of an outlier, right?
And when you say, just clarify, when you say fit, you're not talking about does he fit with our defensive scheme or our offensive scheme. It's do I fit into the culture that we are trying to build.
Exactly. Danny nailed it. But ultimately, I think these are guys that really impact Georgia in a way that if they click, Georgia could be the favorite to win it all. Right? I mean, it's certainly possible.
That's the readjusted ceiling. Like if you add Kendrick at close to 100% of his projected performance, if you add Arik Gilbert at close to 100% of his projected performance, you insert them into this Georgia team, a Georgia team that needs help on the back end and a Georgia offense that needs pass catchers, then you're leveling up from what I was talking about, that very high floor, to national championship.
I mean, two guys that if they play 13, 14 games are guaranteed top 100 picks and likely first round types.
Yeah. I mean, they're 5-star projection. I think Kendrick was a 5-star too. So they should be a top 40 pick.
Yep.
And that's very, very, very interesting stuff. And as Bud mentioned, we'll keep an eye on this story. The odds makers might be doing that too. Actually, if the odds makers are sitting back and being like, yeah, let's wait till they get cleared before we start moving this too much.